And joining me now from Abuja via Zoom to discuss the final evacuation, the bomb attacks, and the need for humanitarian attention on the situation in Afghanistan is an International Affairs Analyst, Paul Ejime. Good to have you join us.
Thank you for having me.
So the reason American forces and American and allied forces spent 20 years in Afghanistan was to ensure that that country is no longer used as a launching pad of attacks against America and its allies. So when you saw what happened with ISIS-K now claiming responsibility for that bombing, what's your thought on that?
So it is a failure of policy, a failure of strategy, and that has given rise to this unfolding humanitarian disaster. Because when the Americans went in 2 decades ago, like you said, it was to make Afghanistan free of what has just happened, or a similar thing that is now happening, of insurgency groups and ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and even the Taliban. It was against the Taliban, mark you, 20 years ago. But look at it, it is the Taliban now that are assisting the Americans in the evacuation. So you can see what has happened, coming back to, is it ground zero? So what has been achieved? What has now been achieved is they have left Afghanistan perhaps worse than 20 years ago. What happened on Thursday was America enduring one of the worst, the deadliest attack on its personnel. As at the last count, I think 7 soldiers have been killed. And you mentioned the figure, not to say anything about civilians and those who were trying now to leave Afghanistan because it has become ungovernable.
And now that this has happened there, and they are warnings,
you wonder why it appeared they have in the north.
And
yes, go ahead.
Now that this has happened there, and there are warnings that there of imminent attacks in Kabul, does this come across to you that the U.S. military operations might likely continue?
I doubt. Well, I listened to President Biden, whom, in fact, I sympathize. He has one sympathy because here was a...
Might likely continue.
I doubt. Well, I listened to President Biden, whom, in fact, I sympathize. He has one sympathy because here was a case where he was given what you call a poison chalice. Former President Donald Trump had set in motion this withdrawal, and then which was controversial and still is controversial because it has left Afghanistan, and even the supporters, thousands of people who supported them, they have been more or less abandoned. So it is it's not a victory for the coalition. It's not victory for the world, and it's not even victory for Afghanistan or the Taliban. I think it's just a disaster that is unfolding. So with the fact that now, if ISIS is not threatening, it means that they have pockets. They are there, and they can do what they have done now. They are just telling Americans that, well, listen, you didn't do anything against us, so we can come at you at any time, which is unfortunate. I can't. President Biden insists that Americans will leave by the 31st deadline, and you will wonder if they leave, NATO, all the support, the allied groups leave, it will now be left with the Taliban running the show. And then how are they trustworthy? What now becomes of that country is anybody's guess.
And I like that you mentioned that because it is the interesting point here. The ISIS-K that has claimed responsibility for this attack and Taliban's are enemies. They've been long-time enemies. Just like the Taliban were the insurgent groups against the Ashraf Ghani government. Now it does seem like ISIS-K is now the insurgency group against the Taliban. And because America also have interest now that their soldiers, U.S. forces have been killed, they now share common enemies, and both sides have to find a way to work together. You talked about whether the Taliban can be trusted because intelligence have to be shared. How do you see that playing out?
Well, I think Americans have no choice now. In fact, the world has no choice but to deal with the Taliban. They have to discuss and with them because they are in charge. So if you don't discuss with them, are you going to discuss with them an Afghan state government that has them, dissolved like salt in water? So they are in charge, and then when the desirable is not available, the available becomes the desirable. So what will happen is really difficult to say. But it's like America coming to eat the humble pie. The same Taliban that they said they were going to chase out are now the ones that they are going to talk to now. Why didn't you talk with them in 20 years ago? And look at what has been lost. And they're also being lost. Human beings, being killed. Look at it. And people are now, desperate. That is, you see the desperation of people wanting to leave Afghanistan. It couldn't be worse. So I don't know what really. I think the world will come together to see how they can bring this together. They have to talk to the Taliban and make them see reason that I think they have to share some of those unpopular and nefarious characteristics, that they are against women, that they are against any, human freedom and all that. So it is up to them, it's their call now to see. But perhaps they can become born again to see. Now you talked about common enemy. Where is the common enemy? Is it ISIS? Tomorrow you will also find another armed group springing up. So because Afghanistan has become ungovernable, and no thanks to this policy or strategy that has failed. There was no, perhaps they went in, the Americans and this group, but there was no strategy about how, when you leave, what happens. And that is often the case when you go to occupy another country. They did it in Iraq, and then they've done it in Libya. It has always never ended well, because you cannot love the people more than themselves. Well, support them, but don't go there. If what has happened in Afghanistan, by the way, with the spending of almost $2 trillion, it's a corruption, and let's call it by what it is. If it happened in developing countries, they will tell you, all kinds of principles will be adduced as to what happened. But you see, defense industry from America and other places, they feasted on a cow. They milk that cow, the Afghan cow, and that cow is almost dead now. It's comatose, and it will be up to the world.
Almost with little or nothing to show for all of that, but not even a viable military.
Exactly.
Not even a viable military in Afghanistan. But let's talk about these evacuations, because this is where the trouble really is now. A lot of countries are looking to evacuate citizens and Afghans who have proper document out of that country, but it would seem like these evacuations started too late and are going to end too early. There are people who helped America in Afghanistan, translators, collaborators, their lives and the lives of their families are now being put at risk. Taliban has said it has to end on the 31st of August. Do you see more attacks? Do you see more trouble, just challenges arising from this evacuation?
Well, challenges will be an understatement. I think there is a problem that both the Taliban and the world, particularly the Americans, that have called this, very sudden and unprecipitated, withdrawal. There was no need for it. It could have been gradual. But they have done it. Now they've left, more or less abandoned those who supported them. If they're able to evacuate all the Americans, Europeans there, what about those who they are now living there with the Taliban who were, really, they were in government, don't forget, and that government was repressive. And how are they now going to be sure that the repression will not come back? So it is a very catch-22 situation that the world has found itself. I hope and pray that, well, there is reason that these militant organizations like ISIS or Al-Qaeda do not capitalize on the situation to just kill innocent people, because if they were fighting among themselves, that is understandable. But the danger is that there will be collaterals. There will be civilians that will just die, in a crossfire, and which is an unavoidable situation. But now I think both locally, the Taliban government, if there is government, will now have to rein in on whatever extremist people that they have, and then the world at large will now also do something at the global level to support to minimize. This is now risk reduction that they are doing now, because.
Sorry, I just have, because I have a little time left, I want to come in with this. I wouldn't want to leave you without asking you about it, because you mentioned something like that earlier. That America cannot love some of these countries more than their people. Do you see America, or is it time for America to begin to rethink its interventionist policy? We have American forces in Africa, we have American forces in South Korea, American forces in Taiwan. Is it time for America to begin to rethink its interventionist policies?
Well, not just America. You've seen the French. They have their stranglehold across the Francophone countries. You have, and then you also have some, not just these superpowers. You have all manner of people. You have mercenaries now fighting in Africa and other developing countries. I think that there has to be a stop to it, because if you talked about colonialism or imperialism, because that is what it is, you can't go to another country to invade, or to think that you can change the regime there to have one that will favor you, so that you continue to, because of your interest, you are furthering your own interest at the expense of the countries, of citizens of that country. That has to end. If you are supporting them, you can support, you can trade, but not to take over governance or begin to impose, because that is what it is. I was reading where they said, well, you cannot export democracy, you can't export freedom. But you also see the hypocrisy of the superpowers. What they cannot allow in their place, they are allowing it in all these other places, because it is about strategic national interest. But that should now be mellowed to make sure that it is not at the expense of the rest of the world. Let there be fairness, let there be justice, let there be freedom that is universal, that must be enjoyed by everybody, whether in the south or in the north, developed or developed country. And that way, I think, let the world, walk the talk. Let them not just to preach, but let them also do what they preach. I think that is what I would suggest. And then it's difficult, it's easier said than done, but that is the only way that the world will know peace.
We appreciate your time as always, Paul Ejime. Thanks for talking to us.
Thank you for having me.